Okay, today we'll be talking about a date which will live in infamy. But before we get to that, the book is a little bit out of order, so I'm going to try to explain the war in chronological order. First of all, we have Britain standing alone. We left off where the Germans were able to take over Poland, the lowlands, and then France itself. And now only Great Britain stands alone. What people didn't know is the Soviet Union made a secret pact with Germany to split Poland. And so technically, the Soviet Union were friends with the Germans, but that wouldn't last. So, so now we look at these two major Allied countries that are not even in the war in 1940. And even in 1941, we'll see these two countries start to enter, but very slowly. And so we start with the Germans. They hold all of this territory here from Poland to France. Italy has joined them. All these Balkan countries here are joining. Yugoslavia kind of goes back and forth, but eventually they become part of the Axis. And the Italians are moving into British territory here in Egypt because Britons are all by themselves. They have a great navy, but they don't have a terrific army, especially after the bulk of their armor, their equipment had to be left behind on the continent when they evacuated from Dunkirk. So the British are in really, really bad position. And the American president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, knows this, so he sets up what's called a Lend-Lease. And this is very important because without the Lend-Lease, the British don't have the equipment. They need the industrial might of America with all our factories, with our workforce, all our resources. It makes it possible to make the planes, the trucks, the food, the oil, whatever is needed for war can come from America. But Americans don't want to get involved in the war. They want to be neutral, as we have been traditionally throughout history. And so Franklin Delano Roosevelt says, okay, we're not going to just give them weapons. We're going to lend it to them. We're going to lease it to them. Okay, they can borrow it, they can rent it from us, and they'll pay us back. Those details really aren't as clear as some people might have liked, but he's going to set up a lend lease so that Britain can get this equipment, and then they'll pay us back when they can pay us back. So that is a very important thing here. The lend lease, we're edging closer to the Allies, but we are not quite part of the Allies. So the Battle of Britain takes place, and what that is basically is without, a good army to protect them, they rely on their navy and their air force to protect them. So the Germans want to destroy British industry, destroy their shipping, and so they send out subs to knock out the shipping, and they send out planes to bomb their cities, bomb their factories, bomb their airfields, and the British even though they're totally outnumbered in the air, they put up a great fight. Their pilots are highly regarded in this time period here, and they're able to fend off the Germans. So the Germans call off their attack on the British. And because that is called off, Hitler turns his sights towards Russia and in 1941 invades Russia and starts pushing onto Russia. That's where we get the Soviet Union on the side of the Allies in 1941. So that's how the Russians come onto the side. Otherwise, they might have stayed at least neutral to the Axis and let them do what they needed to do. But Germany went after Russia in 1941. Uh, while everybody is occupied with this, America's trying to keep Britain afloat. Russia is now we're trying to keep Russia afloat against the Axis onslaught. Nobody is looking in the Pacific. And you can see here is Japan on one side of the Pacific, and Pearl Harbor, Midway is in the middle of the Pacific. Pearl Harbor and Hawaii is pretty close. It's very far out there in the Pacific, nowhere near the coast of California. And so nobody's looking in this direction while the Japanese are really fighting with the Chinese. But the Japanese have their eyes on all the natural resources down here in the Dutch East Indies. The problem is that the Philippines is controlled by the Americans. And so in order to send ships and warships and forces down through here, they got to go right past the Philippines, and they're worried that as they do so, the Americans will attack. So they believe that they have to attack the Americans first, so they send a fleet all the way over here to knock out our fleet here in Pearl Harbor. And so that's where we get December 7th, a date which will live in infamy. So remember, December 7th, 1941. It's at the very end of 1941 where the Japanese used their 6 aircraft carriers to bomb our Navy and kill, almost 3,000 people, 1,000 more wounded. We were humiliated. Our Navy was almost completely destroyed. You could see here, there's a map of Pearl Harbor. These big symbols here are battleships, and 4 of our 8 battleships in Pearl Harbor were destroyed. The other 4 were heavily damaged. And so the pride of our fleet was completely knocked out. We had no more battleships to fight the Japanese. And so the Japanese believed that if they did a blow, they didn't think they would be this successful, but they thought if they could knock out a couple of big ships, that the Americans will not want to fight and they'll back down. But the exact opposite happened, where Americans were so incensed with this sneak attack on one of our biggest bases and blowing up all these ships that united the American people as I've never seen in our history. And not only did we want to go after Germany, but we wanted Japan big time. And so we declare war on Japan, and Germany declares war, and Italy declare war on the United States. And so now America is fully on board, as we saw here. Now, after 1941, as we enter 1942, the Americans are now 100% on board because of Pearl Harbor. So that's a very important date that will in infamy. Not too many dates that you really have to remember about American history, but December 7th, 1941, you have to remember. That is a big date in American history. So now, without the American Navy in the way, all those battleships destroyed, America is greatly weakened. Japan just goes on a rampage. They take over the Philippines, take over Borneo, Dutch East Indies. They start moving to New Guinea, all the way into the Solomons, where they go all the way to the Guadalcanal, Marshall Islands, Gilbert Islands, and they will be attacking Midway. We'll get to that later. But basically, this whole area here, the Japanese take over now because they're able to knock out the American Navy. Remember, the British Navy is over here, but they're mostly occupied in Europe. And then really all you have is Australia, New Zealand. They're not very big countries. It's America that's the only one that can really stand up to Japan. And so that's where we head into 1942. Now that is the first phase of the war, where now the forces are aligned. You've got the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese versus the British, Americans, and Soviet Union. Thanks for watching.